Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight, we step into Tudor England, where a crown offered no safety. This is the story of Catherine Howard, a queen whose suffering began before death. Her execution lasted seconds. What came before lasted months. Isolation, interrogation, and waiting did the real damage. You are alone in a candlelit chamber at Hampton Court. Footsteps move beyond the door, careful and distant. You listen, because nothing else is permitted. If quiet histories like this draw you closer, gently like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell us where you are watching from tonight. Because this story traveled nearly 5 centuries to reach you. Now, dim the lights and soften your breathing. Let the modern world drift a little farther away. Imagine wax melting, shadows stretching, time slowing deliberately. It is late November, the year 1541. Catherine Howard is still queen, at least on paper. By morning, titles will begin to fall away. What follows is not justice, nor mercy. It is a system teaching a young woman to wait. Death waits patiently, but waiting works much harder. It stretches minutes until they feel instructional and endless. The body prepares for an ending it cannot schedule. You notice the room never explains itself. Candles shorten, shadows lengthen, answers never arrive. Time becomes the only authority still speaking. Execution promises certainty, even if certainty hurts. Waiting offers nothing but possibilities, all of them sharp. The mind fills gaps faster than guards fill corridors. You listen for footsteps, then listen harder afterward. Isolation does not shout, it whispers repeatedly. It removes calendars, conversations, and reliable markers. Morning and night blur into the same restraint. Questions arrive without solutions attached. Accusations hover without conclusions delivered. Hope becomes a disciplined habit you practice privately. You learn how patience turns predatory. Every knock carries a future you cannot preview. Every silence implies decisions made elsewhere. Sleep arrives late, leaves early, refuses explanations. Waiting teaches the body new rhythms. Meals arrive on time, mercy never does. Guards rotate shifts, fear never clocks out. The system keeps excellent records of everything except you. You realize the cruelty is not accidental. Uncertainty keeps obedience intact and resistance unfocused. A person planning survival cannot plan defiance. Waiting becomes a quiet form of management. This is where damage accumulates without bruises. Interrogations end, but questions remain active. Isolation pauses conversations, not imagination. The mind rehearses outcomes until exhaustion feels useful. You begin to understand why endings feel kinder. An ending has shape, boundaries, a final breath. Waiting has none of those comforts available. It expands to occupy every remaining thought. Here comes the dry fact history rarely highlights. The blade ends fear. Waiting teaches it endurance. You sense the air grow heavier without temperature changing. Time presses closer, like furniture moved inward overnight. Nothing happens, which becomes its own message. You learn how systems prefer unresolved tension. A person who waits remains compliant by necessity. A person who knows can choose differently. So, knowledge stays, delayed, carefully rationed. Waiting becomes the longest sentence passed. You sit with this realization longer than expected. Not because it surprises, but because it feels familiar. Modern rooms still practice this method quietly. Here is the human value worth carrying forward gently. Certainty, even painful, respects human limits. Prolonged uncertainty quietly erodes them instead. If mercy exists, it should not arrive late. The room arranges itself like a document. Chairs align, papers wait, ink smells patient. No one asks how you feel tonight. You are not here to be understood. You are here to be resolved. A person invites questions. A problem invites procedure. Catherine becomes the second without announcement. You sense the shift before words confirm it. Names turn formal, voices slow, empathy steps back. The atmosphere grows careful, not kind. This is not a court seeking truth. It is a chamber managing risk. Questions arrive with predetermined shapes. They do not ask what happened. They ask which version fits best. You answer slowly, because speed feels dangerous. Silence stretches longer than speech ever could. Each pause feels annotated, somewhere unseen. Not speaking becomes a statement of its own. You realize how quiet can be weaponized. Confessions form under gravity, not clarity. Pressure bends language into something cooperative. Words emerge, shaped by consequence, not memory. You watch, meaning get negotiated mid-sentence. There is no advocate beside you. No rulebook opens in your defense. Protection is not missing by accident. It was never invited. Law appears only when it agrees. Procedure follows power like a shadow. Fairness remains theoretical, safely distant. You learn the cost of being symbolic. A queen represents stability, honor, legitimacy. When that symbol cracks, repair feels optional. Removal feels efficient. This is how politics pretends to be neutral. Every statement you make becomes evidence. Every hesitation becomes interpretation. Every denial becomes a challenge to authority. You feel language turn brittle in your mouth. The room prefers conclusions to complexity. Ambiguity makes administration uncomfortable. So ambiguity is pressed flat. Truth becomes inconvenient texture. You sense that guilt is assumed quietly. Innocence requires effort nobody budgets. The outcome wants to arrive on time. You are expected to assist. This is where humanity thins without notice. Not through cruelty, but through process. Not through shouting, but through alignment. You stand very still to avoid misreading. Here comes the dry observation that lingers. Justice does not always seek accuracy. Sometimes it seeks closure. Closure arrives cleaner, without resistance. The room exhales when certainty appears. Papers stack neatly, voices soften again. The problem seems solved on paper. You remain unsolved. You notice the temperature drop slightly. Not from winter, but from distance. The system moves on, satisfied. And you understand something quietly important. When people are treated as problems, solutions rarely include mercy. They include efficiency instead. Here is the human value worth carrying forward. Fairness begins with recognition of personhood. Without that, procedure becomes permission. Her story begins before anyone bothers to notice. In rooms where supervision feels optional, not missing, noise replaces guidance, and silence covers mistakes. You picture a household always slightly too busy. Adults move through quickly. Responsibility moves slower. Rules exist, but enforcement rarely stays awake. This is where vulnerability learns its posture. Catherine grows up surrounded by people, not protection. Attention arrives unevenly, often poorly explained. Boundaries feel suggested, not enforced. You can sense how confusing that becomes. Affection appears without instruction or safety. Correction comes later, fully formed, unforgiving. No one pauses to ask what she understood then. Understanding is assumed retroactively. Youth in this world is not a defense. It is an inconvenience history prefers to ignore. Mistakes age quickly when power demands clarity. You watch the timeline compress unfairly. When she enters court, her past follows silently, not as context, but as inventory. Experiences are rebranded as evidence. No allowance is made for confusion. The environment that shaped her choices disappears from view. Only the choices remain, isolated, sharpened. Responsibility detaches from circumstance cleanly. That detachment looks very official. You notice how systems dislike messy origins. They prefer clean causes and singular blame. Complex childhoods complicate verdicts. So complexity is removed. The girl she was never enters the room. Only the woman she must answer for appears. Age becomes irrelevant once consequences begin. You sense the imbalance immediately. What she lacked early becomes a liability later. Lack of guidance transforms into guilt. Lack of protection becomes moral failure. The math feels efficient, not fair. You hear judgment arrive without curiosity attached. No one asks who failed her first. That question creates too many answers. Better to skip it. This is how youth becomes invisible. Not denied, just ignored politely, as if it never mattered enough to count. You realize how often this pattern repeats. Children adapt to environments they do not choose. Adults later punish those adaptations. The transition feels seamless to observers. To the child, it feels like betrayal delayed. Here comes the dry truth history leaves quiet. Vulnerability rarely earns mercy later. It earns scrutiny instead. Scrutiny arrives fully grown. You feel the air soften briefly with recognition. Not forgiveness, just understanding delayed. Understanding does not change outcomes, but it changes weight. And that weight matters. Here is the human value, worth carrying gently. Context does not excuse harm, but it explains it. Ignoring it creates convenient cruelty. A childhood that never counted still shaped everything. The system enters the room before the questions do. It brings chairs, order, and a conclusion waiting quietly. Truth is expected to arrive already shaped. You feel it immediately. This is not a search. This is an alignment exercise. Investigators do not ask what happened. They ask what can be made to fit. Events are flexible when power needs certainty. You sit still and listen to the questions narrow. Each answer is weighed against a mood, not evidence. Anger sets the standard before facts arrive. Anything that calms authority becomes acceptable. Silence, here, counts as resistance. When stories differ, the system does not hesitate. It selects the darker version without discussion. Doubt feels disloyal in tense rooms. You notice how quickly nuance leaves. Consistency matters more than accuracy. A clean narrative matters more than a messy reality. Justice prefers stories that travel well. This is where interpretation replaces investigation. Witnesses speak under pressure that edits memory. Fear smooths details into agreement. Language bends toward survival instinctively. You understand why confessions appear cooperative. The process rewards answers that reduce friction. Complicated truths slow momentum. Momentum keeps authority comfortable. Comfort is the real objective. You sense how inevitability is manufactured, not announced, but implied carefully. Every step feels reasonable on its own. Together, they form a trap. This is not failure of justice. Failure would imply expectation. Here, expectation never existed. The design is intentional. Justice here does not need to succeed. It only needs to conclude. Conclusion restores order without explanation. You watch order become persuasive. Documents fill with certainty that feels rehearsed. Signatures replace questions cleanly. The room relaxes once alignment is achieved. Truth exits unnoticed. You realize how systems protect themselves elegantly. They absorb contradictions until nothing protests. They reward agreement like good manners. Resistance feels impolite. This is the dry irony history offers quietly. Justice works best when nobody expects fairness. Expectation complicates procedure. Procedure prefers obedience. You feel the air change as resolution settles. Not relief, but closure, manufactured on schedule. Everyone can move forward now. Someone always does. Here is the human value worth holding gently. Truth requires patience that power rarely budgets. Without patience, justice becomes performance. And performance never asks permission to punish. The first things to disappear are not people. They are connections. You notice it quietly at first. Names stop being mentioned. Faces no longer appear at the door. Silence fills spaces where loyalty once lived. This is how the system begins its work. One by one, the threads around her snap. A friend questioned too thoroughly. A servant dismissed without explanation. A familiar voice removed from the room. You feel the room grow emptier without changing size. Those who loved her become liabilities overnight. Those who helped her become risks that must be managed. Those who simply knew her become unfortunate coincidences. Association becomes a dangerous currency. You understand the rule quickly. Distance equals safety. Closeness invites consequence. Affection learns to evacuate efficiently. She remains, watching the perimeter collapse inward. Others are taken away first. She hears about it later, indirectly, carefully. Survival begins to feel misplaced. It is not the loss alone that hurts. It is the order of loss. She outlives the people who mattered. You sense how cruel that sequence becomes. The system does not hurry her death. It clears the room first. It ensures she stands alone when the end arrives. Isolation looks cleaner that way. You realize this is not accidental. Witnesses complicate stories. Relationships blur responsibility. So, relationships are removed. She carries the knowledge quietly. That others suffer because she remains breathing. That her presence costs more than her absence. This is a heavy arithmetic to perform nightly. You sit beside her in that silence, listening to absence make its own noise. Not loud, just persistent. Guilt grows without being accused. Death promises an end to this accounting. Living requires daily recalculation. Who paid for today? Who will be taken tomorrow? You understand why survival starts to feel like punishment. Time stretches cruelly in this arrangement. 3 months feels long enough to learn regret by heart, long enough to watch consequence ripple outward. Waiting becomes participation. The system allows her to stay alive. That is the mercy offered. It is not gentle. Mercy can be exhausting. You notice how relief appears misdirected. The end stops the chain reaction. The damage ceases spreading. Death closes the ledger. Here comes the dry observation history avoids. Sometimes survival is not the victory. Sometimes it is the longest sentence. Endings can be merciful when isolation is complete. You feel the air settle toward stillness now. Not peace, but finality, with edges softened. No more updates arrive. Here is the human value worth carrying forward. People are not collateral for systems. Relationships should not be punishable offenses. And suffering should not require witnesses to matter. The room grows quieter now. The footsteps have faded down distant corridors. Even the candles seem ready to rest. Somewhere, stone walls still hold the cold. Wax once dripped onto wooden floors. Keys once turned without explanation. Silence once arrived before answers did. You can almost hear fabric brushing stone, almost feel the night air settling heavier, almost sense how long waiting can last. Now, gently, the distance returns. The chamber softens into memory. The door closes without sound. Time loosens its grip and steps back. You are here again, breathing steadier. The room around you familiar and safe. History remains behind the glass. Not forgotten, but no longer pressing. Like a book closed with care. If these quiet stories stay with you, you may leave a gentle like below, or share this night with someone else. If you wish to return another evening, an unhurried subscription keeps the door open. Grimverse history waits patiently. No shouting, no demands, only shadows, memory, and time. For now, let the silence settle kindly. Let the past rest where it belongs. And let yourself drift a little closer to sleep. Goodbye, and we will meet again.